What advice would you give to young songwriters just beginning?
I love this question. I would give some advice that's on the more technical side about skill building and craft building. And then I would give another set of advice that's on the emotional, spiritual side, like soul side. On the technical side, I seek out resources, like to seek out a teacher or a class or a book or a metronome. To seek that stuff out is not a sign of weakness, or a rhyming dictionary. To seek that stuff out is a strength. Like, nobody learns anything in a vacuum and without support. And so my advice would be to not do what I did when I was starting out, which is to somehow think that, or to invite one's ego to think like, I've got this. But that to seek out, like, there's all kinds of great books. The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron is a life-changing volume and workbook, and brings you through the journey of confronting your own resistance and your own barriers. There's an author named Stephen Pressfield who wrote The War of Art, Do the Work. There's many, many, many volumes. He's great. Seth Godin is great. And the list just goes on and on. So seek out those teachers. They say, like, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Like, seek out those teachers who resonate. And don't be afraid to turn a corner if you find a teacher who's not resonating. So I've signed up for lessons off and on over the decades. And some people can bring out the best in me, and other people just we don't resonate in that way. And so don't be afraid to try again, right? Like, just show up. So on the technical side, there's also a bunch of advice I would give about, like, habit development. You know, if a person wants to develop competency in an instrument, it requires playing that instrument. So instead of feeling like it's a chore or an obligation, invite yourself to visit your instrument as a joy. Because I think sometimes formal education around music can steal some of the joy out of it somehow. When we become over possessed with perfection and we forget the music part of it. And it's a conversation with your soul. And so that's such a gift, and that's a life of, now I'm veering into the spirit side. So I would say if it's something that a songwriter starting out just feels drawn to, then just keep doing it and show up, and just keep showing up. And if there isn't joy in it, then maybe try painting or try pottery or try something else. There's many paths to Rome. There's many paths to a happy life and happy existence and self-awareness and connection with other people. And music is one. It's my favorite, but it won't be everybody's. But you don't know that until you try. Listening is huge. Listening to yourself, like, so on the spirit side, I'll say my biggest piece of advice would be, especially to fellow females who are told from so many different angles in our culture that we're not enough. I would just say my advice to anyone starting out and any fellow female musician is that you are enough. You're enough. Like, you're beautiful just the way you are. And so listening from the perspective of music and expressing yourself, listen to what you have to say, and don't worry if it's different. Like, I have a whole album called Misfit, and so I've decided that fitting in is ridiculously overrated. And so I'd say explore your core values and know that authenticity is strength. You surround yourself with people who are healthy for you. There's enough unhealthy influences in our culture, on television, on billboards that we see when we're driving around. There's enough of that. We don't need to voluntarily then add people who are also unhealthy or, even worse, toxic. So know that you deserve to be surrounded by love and by people who are good for you. Not yes men, to use that phrase, So it's not that you need people who are saying, that's the best song I've ever heard. Like, honesty is great. And the people who love me the most will tell me the truth. And that's great, because I want to grow and I want to improve. And so I would also say on the spiritual side, try to keep your ego out of it. I consider music like a higher calling. And every time my ego gets involved, and if I let my ego start to drive the car, we're not going to be going in the right direction. And so letting your ego sit in the back seat means that you can stay open to the right answers when they come. You can stay open to constructive criticism and continue to get better without worrying about like how it appears. Or there's a great Ray Charles quote that I have always lived my musical and probably otherwise life by, which is, I never wanted to be famous, I only wanted to be great. And that's not to put too much pressure on young writers, but it is to say stay aligned with the right reasons to do it. The reasons to do it aren't fame and fortune. The reasons to do it are because it's who you are, and it's because it's how your soul wants to express itself, and it's a beautiful community of people. And ego will be trouble every time. To have a day job is not failure. So a lot of people will just assume that the goal is to be a full-time musician and lament the fact that one isn't focused wholeheartedly on it. And in The Artist Way, I learned about this concept of the artist date. So the idea is to go out in the world and be engaged in the world, because everything that you're doing in the world, go to museums, talk to people, go to events, listen to other musicians, all of that only enriches your own music and just your own understanding and expansiveness as a human being on earth, and therefore what you have to say and what you have to share and so on. So if you find yourself in any field, I mean, there just so many amazing musicians have second careers at one point or another, and their music is enriched by it, and it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of diverse interests, and sometimes putting too much pressure on music to be a source of income can steal some of the joy out of it and can turn it into a burden and not a joy. So the time may come to do full-time music, but that doesn't have to be the goal from the outset necessarily. And there are plenty of successful musicians who are also doing other things, and that's totally okay. The one other book I would mention is, I think it was Liz Gilbert wrote a book called Big Magic that is also just a lovely volume that looks at helping people unlock the barriers between themselves and their own creative expression. And there's a podcast
Cool.
that she produced as well. Yeah.
Very cool.
And get a cat, of course. Like
Cats
that's just advice
make
number
everything
one.
better.
Yeah, we can start every answer in this interview with a cat.
Stretching